Thank you very much. First, thanks to Greg for that lovely introduction. I have to say, you'd be a fantastic person on a table quiz team if you knew all of those things at the age of 15. I have to say, when I read the programme and read the topic, I was secretly delighted that Rory, Ronan and I were listed as youngish. I wondered what the technical definition of that word was. And then I thought, you know what, I'm young enough to know who the singer Adele is and what the TV show Glee's about. But I'm still old enough to remember when Starsky and Hutch was on the telly and wasn't just a movie. And I also remember when mobile phones was actually just a landline with a really, really long extension cable. So maybe I am sort of suiting that technical definition of that word. I'm going to really focus on politics because as my background sort of maybe gives it away, it's very much my passion. It's what I focused on for the last number of years. But firstly, I just want to start by painting a picture of who we are talking about here when we're talking about youngish people, and to pick up on some of the things that Rory's talked about. For my research, I actually took the median age of our country, which is 34 years old. I took that as the top point of the cut-off point for young and youngish people, and it was for two reasons, mainly because I could use some quite interesting data sets in a nerdy kind of way to try and compare and contrast in terms of politics, but also it does allow me to speak from somewhat of a personal standpoint, because yes, I too felt that onus of speaking on behalf of all young people this morning, and I felt the onus was just too great to try and carry. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about people who are aged or who were born from 1977 onwards. And it is around 40% of people in Ireland, which is around 1.1 million people in real terms. So what are we like? For the first part, we're actually fairly well educated. For the most part, we've been taught how to read and write, and to learn by rote, and to regurgitate that in an exam. We've been taught that to get into college, you need to be successful in the classroom, and that points win places in college, and that points are for exams. A huge amount of us go to college. In fact, 45% of us have already been, making us the second large or highest EU country for producing college graduates. Bear in mind now that 34 is now the age of the first people back in 1995 to get free college fees. So all the people that we are talking about right now that qualify with my young definition, all of them have been part of the free college fees programme. Fees that have been paid for the most part, by non-youngish people, but we don't really think about that too much. This is the first generation, I would argue, of truly emancipated women. While there's still a way to go, it's now those who question equality that are outside the mainstream. Women who are forced to give up their jobs in the civil service when they got married. They're stories for us that are those parents, you know, those back in my day stories that your parents tell you. They're resigned to the history books. Of course we'd keep our jobs. If we'd get married, that's the question. And the divorce and contraception battles of previous generations is this generation's same-sex marriage. And we're the forefront of a silent revolution. It's the internet. This has absolutely changed how we learn, and how we interact, and how we even hold conversations. We're the media now. Sorry to let everyone else over there know, but we're the media now. We have the right to read it, to question it, to write it ourselves, and to publish it. We've the right to look through the quagmire of information and views that are out there, and we discern what's true. See, the information's no longer in books. It's in our pocket. We know we're fantastic at producing comedians. We're pretty good at Big Brother. We're not bad at X Factor, and we gave the world U2. And we gave them Brendan Gleeson, and Colin Meaney, and Cillian Murphy, and now Jedward. We know we're meant to hate the British, but thankfully, for the most part, that's wearing off. The burnt-out cars, those images that dominated the news from the north of Ireland have been replaced by those images of Martin McGuinness and Peter Robinson pretending to kind of like each other at executive meetings. And herself came to visit. With the benefits of the EU is frankly known as our daily life. For us, the colour of our passport is purple, not green. And if we're honest, we haven't thought too much at all about the rights we'd lose if Ireland left the EU. It's like Iarn Rud Éireann. We can vilify it and bitch about it, but we'll still quietly use it. Moving on to national politics, which is the area that I'd really like to talk about today. And I know it's a funny one, because when you deal with the issue of young people in politics, the possibilities of walking straight into the land of cliché is really high. So for this, what I did was I undertook a bit of research just to see the cold, hard facts of young people and their involvement in the political system, and to look at it quite ruthlessly. And for this, I have to say a huge thanks is to Claire McGing from NUI Maynooth, who provided me with countless articles and raw data for me to look at, and so a huge thanks to her for it. And it was by forming some conclusions on my own based on this research that unfortunately I was able to defeat every convenient cliché that I could use here. Because young people aren't disenfranchised. Not by the system. We've got the right to vote in this country, we've got the right to register, and we have the right to exercise it. Yes, there are some tweaks that need to be made, but things like postal voting, albeit recently, have been introduced to facilitate youth voting. The fact is, on a fundamental level, young people can vote. Other groups have shown that once you mobilise successfully, politicians do listen. Look at senior citizens who with one march changed national policy, or the Irish Farmers Association, who have 87,000 members recorded on their website. That's one hell of a force in Irish politics. Take that and take the example of the Union of Students of Ireland, who have 250,000 members on their website. See, the data in Ireland shows that we simply don't start to use our vote until around the mid-20s or so, which rather interestingly is just about the same time that politics starts to affect your pay packet. It also shows in the research that young people are starting to use other alternative ways of expressing their political opinions, which is brilliant. But the fact is, without speaking the basic language of voting, the language that politicians are most likely to hear, what incentive is there for a politician to actually change policy, rather than just give platitudes, which is what's happening now? As you can kind of tell, at this moment in time, the very logical and highly unfashionable conclusion I was coming towards was that the main source of exclusion of young people from the political system is primarily the young themselves. So that must be it. It's all the fault of the young people. You can go home now. But that's not it. And we know that's not true either. Because just as there's no major incentive for politicians to really listen, there's not much incentive for young people to vote. I know that there should be, but there isn't. Think of it this way. When you're just about to get the vote at the age of 18, life is busy between studying for points and not embarrassing yourself too much in front of whoever you fancy at that moment in time. And for all the prioritisation of education for the 14 years that we could be in primary and secondary education, we're taught that civics isn't important. We know that, because it's a filler subject that your science or your history teacher takes, just to fill up the time. We know that if it was important for us to know about this, about choices and how your taxes are calculated and what does liberal and conservative mean, we'd know we'd get points for it, because points equal success. That's what the system has built. And as uncomfortable as this is as a fact, we're products of an educational system that does not produce voters. So let's say we are to prioritise civic education. That was my next sort of logical step. I thought, God, what are we going to do? Well, are we going to teach them the real rules of Irish politics, or are we going to teach them the dry, boring legal stuff out of a book? Because the fact is, there actually aren't that much differences between the issues of young people and old people. Because regardless of whether you're young or you're old, or you're a farmer, or you're a Gaeilgeoir, or you're from the west of Ireland or the east of Ireland, that we all work off the same rules of Irish politics. And I've worked out in my head that I think there's three. And the first one is that politics is about access rather than ideals. We're all not stupid. We're all going to go where the power is. And it really is about whether you are in the know or out of the know, rather than whether you're liberal or conservative. It's ultimately actually knowing about the 15 people who are sitting around the cabinet table who really make the decisions in Ireland. Which, when you look at it, is 0.04% of Irish politicians. So it's really about accessing those 15. And there's been a huge amount this week, which is really good work in terms of getting 6 of them here. But there's around about 6, accessing those 15. So let's hope that one of them is in our constituency. The second rule is that someone else is responsible for it, and someone else should pay for it. We are, without question, living in tight and economic times, and that's an understatement. And the election promises are going to continue to unravel. But a huge amount of time in this country is spent working out who's to blame for it and who else should pay for it. And when we don't want our services to go, we're implicitly saying that we want someone else's to, or we want someone else to pay for it. And thirdly, Irish politics is about making the least amount of change you can get away with. To take as an example, in 1997, Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair were both elected in that year. In the UK, there was the devolution of powers to the Scottish Parliament, to the Welsh Assembly and to Stormont. There was the creation of a directly elected mayor of London and for other areas of the country, the removal of most hereditary peers from the House of Lords, the introduction of proportional representation for the European Parliament elections, and a referendum on the voting system for Westminster elections. In Ireland, since 1997, while we've had a number of referenda that Greg and I know all too well, not one of them has had to do with planned constitutional reforms to improve or even modernise our country. Instead, we've got 13 reports on Seanad reform. We've got the last Oireachtas Committee on Electoral Reform, which is a subcommittee of the main committee, which in and of itself is a committee to the Dáil, which proposed the setting up of a citizens' committee to look at that issue, presumably to report back to the original committee. So in other words, we got a committee reporting to a committee, which reports to another committee, which would then report to the Dáil. Should we teach young people those rules? Because we can wrap it up in more fancy language if we want, but that's really how Irish politics works. And it shouldn't be the case, but it is. See, for all the talk of young people of Ireland, we've got to remember that, and it's been said here before this week, that Ireland is a young country. And in fact, if you put us into human terms, we're probably around 20 years old, if you think about it. We were born, we learned some habits from our neighbours next door, and we got the scholarship, the EU scholarship, for being poor but smart. And then we blew our pay packet, our first pay packet. We blew it because we went on a gap year. And now we're putting the head down and we're working out what it is that we really want to do. And how much can we afford? But working that out is going to take all of us, and not just young people. We're all going to have to move from a comfortable status quo and make some changes. It's been said here this week, and I'm delighted to hear many other people say it, and let's acknowledge it. We've not changed our political system since the introduction of Bunreacht and Heron in 1937. Yet our people, and especially what we're saying here today, especially that 40%, they most definitely have. So we're using a document that was written at a time when national electrification was still a bit of a novelty and we were getting used to it, and 17 years before Henry Kenny, let alone his son Enda, even entered the Dáil. It took us to economic implosion before we started to look at the way in which we are governed. And even now, I think we've got to be a bit honest and realise we're not really looking at it. Because if you look at any of the proposed reforms that are going around at the moment, not one of them would have changed that banking decision. Not cutting the presidential term to 5 years, or abolishing the Seanad, or ensuring that Standing Orders number 32 are no longer read out in the Dáil. How about having ministers with economic backgrounds in charge of economic portfolios? Maybe that could make a difference. Because I'd love to find out who's our Christiane Lagarde. How about having a parliament that actually calls our government to account? Rather than just being an electoral college for the cabinet or a constituency administrator, how about a parliament that is actually focused on banking regulation and whose members would not be punished by voters for working on it? Because we keep talking about the outputs of reform right now, but I can't see the underlying reasons for them. What system would we have by the end of it? And what values underlie that system? We're going to have to think a lot bigger, and we're going to have to think a lot more long term. We've got to realise ourselves that if we want to keep our local champions, we're going to have to build a system that allows national politicians to devise national law, because they don't have time to be both. We also need to spend our time improving local government or abolishing it. Local councils need to be given real authority. Why can't they set that household charge themselves? If not, what are they there for? And local or national, we can't punish our politicians for making tough decisions, or else no decision will ever be made. For us voters, we're going to have to meet the problems that face us as a country, and we're going to have to accept that the politics of emotion do not supersede the laws of reality and maths. And in this climate, yes, we're going to have to work out who's going to pay for it. It's a lot easier to put up posters with a lot of exclamation marks in it than go through the budget line by line, trying to identify the least harmful savings. But that's what we're going to have to do. From politicians, we're going to demand more leadership. And that makes making unpopular decisions, including for your own constituencies. Enda Kenny showed leadership last week about the Cloynes report. And so did W.T. Cosgrave when his government passed a law to force Fianna Fáil to take their seats in the Dáil, even though they knew this was enabling Cumann na Gael to be removed from office. And yet, because of that, Irish democracy did start to work, and the Civil War split started to heal. See, that's patriotism. That's leadership. And it's inspiring. For younger generations, it's not about being given responsibility or stomping our foot like Veruca Salt. It's about helping build the image of what Ireland is now and where Ireland goes next. For while the UK has the image of Britannia, and now probably Kate Middleton, and for America, they've got Uncle Sam and the American dream, and France has La République and all that goes with it. Here in Ireland, we haven't really built that story yet. We haven't got our new image of where we are now. Maidens dancing barefoot at the crossroads, of poor Paddy doffing his cap, even of the land of saints and scholars, none of that matches our life. See, we're better than the poor cousin of Great Britain. And we're more than the arrogance of the Celtic Tiger years. We have a generation now who do not have the shackles of the troubles, of the fear of the church, of women knowing their place. We have a generation who have tasted success, and some aren't fearful of it either. Yeah, that can come across as arrogant, but that can also be seen as confident too. See, we've got prospects. We made Michael O'Leary, and we made those two young brothers who are over in MIT, and we're producing graduate after graduate. We're getting there. And by recognising that we're not educating citizens, and realising the real rules of politics, and working very genuinely to change a defunct and highly detached system, we could get there better and faster. And then Ireland really would be a place for young women and young men. In fact, for everybody, the young and the old, and even us youngish. Thank you.